Welcome to another edition of Business Morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Esther Ubodaga. Of course, the second edition of the South-South Summit has come to an end. It took center stage last week as investors from all over the world, government officials and dignitaries from within and outside the country gathered in Asaba, the Delta State capital, for the event. The highlights of the event included the key speeches of some eminent personalities, including the president of Rwanda, Mr. Paul Kagame, who was represented by the chief executive officer of the Rwanda Development Board. We also had our own Nobel laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka, and Nigeria's finance minister, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, among several other dignitaries. Now, quite a number of issues were thoroughly thrashed out at that event, from power to infrastructure, agriculture, and of course, security. Now, at the end of it all, the South-South governors were told to translate the agenda for the summit into real action and to go beyond rhetorics and actually develop the region. That's talking about providing basic amenities for citizens, for the state, talking about infrastructure, power, jobs, most importantly for that region. Of course, it has come to the end, and it seems like we are in a season of economic summits. Now it looks like the governors across the federation are looking inwards. There have been calls for state governors to actually look inwards into their individual states to see how they can harness the potential inherent in all of the states and not focus so much on monthly allocations from the federal government as the country continues to depend on foreign oil earnings. Well, today that's what we'll be focusing on. We'll be looking at Nigeria's trade policy and vis-a-vis all of the economic summits that we have been having. Don't forget that we just last week also, we had the Lagos Economic Summit in Ehingbeti 2012, where, of course, the state governor tried to attract foreign direct investment, where he made a call to international investors to come invest in Lagos State. Well, today I'll be talking to Segun Larry Lean. He's a chairman, industrial group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Well, he's also the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. These are some of the issues we'll be looking at today as Nigeria steps up efforts to attract more foreign direct investment. Well, let's take away from that. Let's go back to what the markets were last week. Let's take a brief recap of markets last week. Nigeria's local bourse had a very excellent outing last week, logging a second week of gains. 1.65% is what the bourse logged last week, in addition to about 4.89% recorded the previous week. The All-Share Index closed last week, Friday, at 22,109.44 points. Let's take a look at some of the week's best performers. Let's take a look at the NSE Trading Board. We had Cadbury last week, the best performer, the most profitable stock last week, moving up 27.4%. That's a 3 naira 10 kobo gain for the week, and closing at 14 naira 40 kobo. United Bank for Africa represented the banks, also made it to that list, coming second at over 27% in gains. That's about 76 kobo in gains, also closing at 3 naira 57 kobo per share. Cornell, representing the oil and gas sector, also made it to that list, up 21.4% for the week, gaining about 4 naira 50 kobo and closing at 25 naira 46 kobo per share. Let's take a look also at the week's volume drivers, those stocks that pulled the highest volume at the market last week. United Bank for Africa also made it to the list, top on the list actually, pulling about 447.5 million units. Zenith Bank comes second, 259.2 million units, while First Bank takes the third spot, pulling 211.4 million units. That's a brief recap of the stock market last week. Trading continues today. The opening bell rang at exactly 9:30 a.m. We should be hooking up later on in the program to David Andoring, who will be giving us some early trading numbers. Away from the equities market, let's quickly take a brief look also at the money market. Now, for the interbank rates, that's the cost of lending among banks at the interbank market. We saw rates easing sharply for the week from around 15%. That's for the short-term money. We saw rates coming down to 11.83% on average. Well, last week, the market did receive some budgetary allocations that came into the market, easing the liquidity squeeze that has persisted at the market in the last couple of weeks and even months. And we saw rates coming down significantly by over 3%. We saw core money closing at 11 0.83%. Now, the currencies arm of the market, the Naira, also we saw that closing 157 Naira 60 kobo to the dollar, while the Central Bank of Nigeria last week at its foreign exchange auction selling about 230 million US dollars at both of its auctions last week. That's on Monday and Wednesday last week. Now, let's quickly go back to some data from the money market talking about maturing bills. We did get quite a number of liquidity came into the market, while on the other hand, the Central Bank of Nigeria did some aggressive mopping up of liquidity also. Now, at the primary market auction of the market, we had about 64.7 billion naira in foot. That's for the primary market auction maturing last week coming into the system. We had an average rate of about 15%. And for the open market operations, another tool that the central bank uses to mop up liquidity, excess liquidity from the system. We had about 89 billion of that maturing last week coming into the market with an average rate of 16%. Well, that didn't last very long, as we did have a treasury auction also last week where the central bank mopped up excess liquidity. At the primary market auction, the central bank mopped up about 140.5 billion naira with an average rate of 13.8%. That was on the 26th of April last week, Thursday. And from the open market operations, 172.2 billion naira was also mopped up at an average rate of 14%. That was on the 27th of April last week. Well, that's it. A quick recap of the money markets last week. Of course, markets resumed today for another day of trading. I will be tracking the numbers for you as we get them. Well, let's go over now to early trading from the global stock markets. It's been a very volatile session for the markets, particularly the Asian and European markets. Of course, the debt crisis in Europe still taking center stage, still weighing heavily on the minds of investors. But let's take a look at how Asian markets fared in early trade, kicking off with the Nikkei 225 in Japan, which came down this morning 0.43% at 9,520 points. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong managed to stay afloat, up 1.50%. So we're looking at mixed numbers there from the Asian markets that we usually track here on Business Morning. This is just some of the markets that we usually focus on. The Shanghai Composite Index in China off track this morning, down 0.35% at over 2,396.32 points. The ASX 200 in faraway Australia managed to stay afloat this morning, also close to 1% of gains at 4,396.60 points. Those are the numbers from the Asian markets. The markets are presently closed for the day. Well, let's cross over to the other side of the market. That's talking about the European markets. Just about 2 hours into today's session, the FTSE 100 in London currently leading gains, up 0.05%. Green numbers across the board from the European markets. Looks like a green morning there for stocks in Europe. The DAX in Frankfurt, Germany, also in positive territory, up 0.65%. The Paris CAC 40 in France also trending in positive territory with soft gains, actually 0.04% to the upside, while the Zurich Market Index also currently gaining about 0.06% at 6,120.02 points. While the markets in Europe still have about a couple of hours of trading ahead, and looking at the numbers, we expect that they will remain in positive territory. Away from Europe, let's cross over to the other side of the Atlantic, talking about Wall Street trading from Friday, the 27th of April. We saw the Dow Jones still firmly above the 13,000 point mark, closing last week Friday up at 0.18%. The S&P 500 also rallied. All 10 sectors of the S&P 500 closed in positive territory, up at 1,403.36 points. And NASDAQ also rallied over 0.5% at 3,069.20 points. The Russell 2000 is tracking the performance of the smaller cap stocks listed on the gauge, also ended positively for the week, up 0.87%. So we had green numbers there from Wall Street as it ended the week on a positive note. Well, that's it from that side of the Atlantic. Let's come down to our own markets. Well, we have seen a brief review, but let's just take a look closely at the numbers, what they were. The NSE 30 last week, and that's the gauge that tracks the 30 most, that's the 30 bellwethers or the 30 most capitalized stocks on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. That closed up at 1.26%, adding to gains from the previous week, and has now hit the 1,000 point mark. The banking index also rallied, one of the best performers last week, up 1.84%. Insurance subsector for a second week has went back into negative territory, down at 124.94 points. The food and beverages sector also in positive territory, up at 1.33%. at 1,787.72 points. The oil and gas index, very, looking at the gain, 7.35% is actually the best performer for last week. We haven't seen the oil and gas index recording this gains of so significant in the last couple of weeks. It's actually been coming down, but now it's for last week it was up 7.35%, beating the banking index, which closed at 1.84%. Well, as Nigeria steps up effort to, of course, increase its foreign direct investment and also get more local investors to invest in the country. Well, analysts say that a good trade policy is one factor that will facilitate that. Well, Nigeria has actually been reviewing its trade policy, which was last reviewed about 10 years ago. Well, the Committee of the Review of Nigeria's Trade Policy submitted its report after reviewing the policy that was in March. And, of course, that's what we'll be looking at this morning, how this trade policy can help facilitate better trade among Nigeria and its investors, both within and outside the country. And when Business Morning returns, I'll be talking to Segun Larry Lean. He's the chairman of the industrial group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Well, he's also the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Business Morning. Well, for the first time in 10 years, the federal government decided to review Nigeria's trade policy, which many analysts over the years had said wasn't particularly investor-friendly. Well, a committee was set up to review that particular policy, and they have submitted a draft report, which is still undergoing, which the federal government is still reviewing at the moment. Well, all of this is what we'll be looking at today, Nigeria's trade policy. Of course, it looks like it's a season of summits. We're having state governors trying to draw attention to their individual states to investors to come invest and take advantage of the inherent potential in those states. Well, joining me now is Larry Shegun-Lin. He's a chairman, Industrial Group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. That's what we'll be looking at this morning. Thank you so much, Larry, for being here. And I'm sure you're aware of the summits that we've been having. First, we had the Lagos Summit, Economic Summit last week. We also had the South Summit, and it looks like some other states are maybe not under the theme of a summit, but something very similar, still with the aim of still pulling attention to their states in terms of investment. Let's look at Nigeria's trade policy, where it is right now. Like I said, it hasn't been reviewed in the last 10 years, but all of a sudden it's been reviewed, especially now that there's this clamor for more foreign direct investment. What are your thoughts on the Nigeria's trade policy?
Right. I actually wanted to congratulate the government of Nigeria for deeming it very fit at this time, because the entire world is looking at Nigeria to provide the leadership for Africa. So if the economy is right in Nigeria, it's going to be right for Africa. And then, there are forecasts that Nigeria's economy will surpass that of South Africa in a few years to come. So the trade policy is the main, impetus that will be required to attract people and, both the domestic and foreign investors to the economy. However, looking at the trade policy that we've operated in the last, 10 years or thereabout, it's not inclusive. It's not all inclusive. We have a policy that does not put into reckoning the active participants in the economy. Because the present trade policy is not pro-business, right? So if government is, thinking it right at this time to, to make it all inclusive, I think that's a good thing on part of this administration. When
you say active participants, what part of the sectors across the economic sectors are you referring to?
The organized private sector,
But they have been they've been in the forefront, as it were, at least in the last couple of years. We've been hearing about the organized private sector, which the government has had several dealings with, as it were.
Yeah, dealings on the pages of newspapers. Dealings. When organized private sector, when they talk about the problems they face, in industrialization, in cost of doing business, government will listen, but government would not act. So that has been the experience. Right, and then when you're making policy for people who are the real stakeholders, you need to get them involved. Actively. What are your issues? How do we mitigate, against this all these points? So government must include the organized private sector in the active position. Not passive as we've had in the last, few years.
Okay, now while there's still some grey areas and not as it were, policies are not investor-friendly as it were, now this new policy is expected to provide a comprehensive roadmap for boosting Nigeria's domestic, regional and international trade. Now the committee have submitted this particular report and they've made quite a number of recommendations. It's not official yet, but what are your expectations as regards this trade policy when it's finally unveiled?
I would expect, government should look at industrial clusters that were in operation, during the, regional government, during the parliamentary system we had in Nigeria. When we should have industrial zones that are truly empowered for production, And if government is bringing a trade policy, we must ensure that customs, right, they are facilitator of trade. As against what they have pretended to be at this moment. At the moment, they are just for revenue generation. So we must make the custom department of government very active, in terms of trade facilitation, right? The industrial sector must be empowered. We must provide electricity. We must look at, the security situation in our country, because there's no way business can thrive when you are not, and when you don't feel secured, right? So government must address security situation in our country, that will eventually bring the people. And then our currency is undervalued, because most of our components for production are imported, right? When you buy dollar for 157, right, and then you have 80% of raw materials importation, into production. By the time you are coming out of your factory, right, you are already in deficit. So you have electricity that you're going to generate by yourself. You understand? So these are all factors that will not make any policy attractive. So government must look at those fundamentals. We must look at security situation in our country. All right, electricity. Power is essential. Now our currency. We need to look at our currency once again. If you're import dependent, right, and you are buying raw materials for production, and you are buying at such exorbitant rate, because you will change 160 naira for $1. End of the day, by the time you are going into the market, you are already in deficit. As we speak, goods from Nigeria are not competitive with the West African sub-region. These are issues that must be addressed. So if you make such flamboyant policy statement now, but capacity to implement them or incentives to implement them are not there, it is going to fail.
Now, many of the things you've mentioned, power, security, first of all mentioned the industrial clusters. Now, these are issues that we know about, that are always on the pages of newspapers, and how government is doing its best to deal with them one by one. But it's obvious that our developmental needs will take years to achieve. If we're going to be putting these policies, they won't exactly. Do you think there will exactly be new policies, as it were, being put into this new trade policies? But going forward, solving these problems, it's like I said, it's not going to take a few months, or sometimes even a few years.
Well, that will be tough. The world is a global village, right? Now, unlike those 20, 30 years ago, where some countries can wait for you, nobody's going to wait for you. So we must set, timelines to solving these problems. We must, else, look, the world will look elsewhere. We have very huge potentials, there's no doubt. Nigeria is so endowed in terms of resources, and we are the largest black population in the world, right? As we speak, we are the second largest economy. We have $220 billion GDP, but these are all good numbers.
Impressive numbers that do not seem to be translating down into basic growth, as it were, especially as regards to impacting the lives of Nigerians.
It cannot translate as it's presently constituted, because we have an enclave economy, right? We have an enclave. I mean, we get money from crude oil. Now you ask yourself, how many people would crude oil industry truly employ? Agriculture is supposed to be the mainstay of the economy, but most of our agricultural products are exported, right, at raw value. We need to at least start with, first or secondary processing. Do you understand? To give value to products from our farms. And you can imagine that our agricultural, sector is not really contributing much to the GDP. So it's not employing people as it should. Right, and there is no agro-industrialization. There's no agro-industrialization.
Now, Larry, sorry to cut in here. Now, with all of this being said, I'm just thinking, especially making reference to the South-South Summit that we had, how easy is it to sell Nigeria? I know there were foreign investors there. We know that we still have structural defects in the economy. We're still heavily reliant on mono economy, that's oil. We're still struggling to diversify the economy, even though we still have a good non-oil sector, talking about the agriculture sector, that still accounts for about 40% of GDP. So what would they be saying because I know at the summit they talked about issues of security, agriculture, all of those other sectors that investors can invest in. But what do you think will be going through the minds of investors, being aware that there's still so much work to be done? So are we in a situation where we are saying, okay, we do know that our house is not particularly in order. We are still asking investors on one hand to come, and then when they come, what is it that we're going to fix the problem together? Because obviously, like I said, this developmental needs are going to take years and years to actually solve.
There's what we call image overhang. There's perception problem as regards Nigeria. And then the more we see some fallouts from our security situation in Nigeria, the more the newspaper or the global network of television, the more they announce that, oh, there's a bomb blast today. If you are coming to a country, except you want to go, except you are so desperate, and you feel that, look, when you get to that country, you are not going to be safe. Your family will advise you not to go, right? Even if you could get gold on the street. So we need to address security situation. The perception problem that, look, Nigeria is a corrupt country. People say Nigeria is a corrupt country because people want to collect bribe from you, even from the airport. That has to be changed. We must reorient our people, right? That, look, the 200 naira you collect at airport or at any of our gateway will make some people to lose their job or will create unemployment. So there are basic situations that we must really address sincerely. Honestly. Now, for South, I want to congratulate them for that initiative. South.
It was quite a large turnout. We did get tons and tons of investors, especially from outside the country. So that just begs the question. Yes, we do have, in terms of a political risk, which is quite high and has been high in the last recent weeks, talking about the unfortunate bombings that we've been having and gun attacks, but they still come into the country.
Yeah, they come, but then, investment decision will be made after coming. They've come to look at what we are doing, but then when it comes to investment decision, those guys that have come for those summit, they will be reporting, to the board. Look, we are coming to Nigeria. They look at Nigeria. Is Nigeria safe? Okay, personnel that are coming that are being posted to Nigeria, are they going to be safe? At the moment, we are considered high risk nation. You understand? Based on those multifarious negative factors.
So, as if you were an investor, because I know you're with the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council, as it were, and you're also part of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. If you, as a local investor, as it were, would you still put your money on Nigeria?
I will, but I probably will not do as much as I should do. So how we put some money, but how we watch, right, until the government kind of fix those areas, that are needful. People will come, they watch, they invest a little, and they stay back and they watch how it is being translated. Then they move. We can have far more than what we are doing at the moment. If some basic things are put together, Nigeria is a richly endowed country. It's a big country and it's an investor's delight. As long as those issues...
Despite everything, we're still an investor's delight.
We are investors' delight, but we can do better.
We can do better. Okay, let's take a short break at this time. We'll come back. We'll talk about Nigeria's trade relations with other countries, particularly with Malaysia, which you will be talking to us about. I've been talking to Larry Shegun-Lin. He's a chairman, Industrial Group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. We have been looking at Nigeria's trade policy. We've also been looking at, of course, investment in the country. The South Summit just concluded. What investors will be thinking, how easy is it for to sell Nigeria, and some other issues that we'll also be looking at. We'll take a short break now and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Business Morning. We're still talking Nigeria's trade policy and, of course, the increased call for more foreign direct investment into the country. Larry Shegun is still here, and that's what we're looking at. Before we go into, before the break, I did say that we would go into Nigeria's trade relations with other countries, particularly Malaysia. But let's talk about the Ministry of Trade and Investment. And, of course, this ministry was actually set up to help increase or the foreign direct investment in the country. How would you rate the performance of this ministry so far? I know that the ministry has, led by Dr. Olusegun Aganga, they have gone on several road shows. They've even gone as far as Australia to bring investors. How well do you think they're doing?
In terms of activities, they're doing very well. The ministry is doing very well in terms of activities and, intentions, very good intentions. They truly want to bring investment to the country. But, like we have said earlier on, there are factors that are impeding investment. No matter how much you talk about this, if those things are not put together, the minister has done very well. He's met with the organized private sector in Lagos. I think, few weeks into this administration, they were in Lagos to meet with the OPS, and it was a successful event. All the big guys in Lagos were there, but we need to kind of measure what we are doing. The ministry should liaise with the OPS, with the organized private sector, right? And to create a benchmark for performance. How are we doing? We are partners in all of this. We are all stakeholders in the Nigeria project. We need to measure how far have we gone, what are the issues. If we can take them one after the other. Take, for instance, if you take power and even if you go to borrow money to get power correct, power right, look, you would have solved 50% of our problems. Get electricity working, If you don't have electricity working, if people like your face, many people like your face as a good man, right? But then their lives, their posterity depends on the decision they take. If they make wrong decision because of that they like your face, nobody will forgive them, So we need to fix the fundamentals in the economy.
Now, well, obviously, that's what the government is doing. We do know about the power sector reform and all that's been done. The investors that have been expressed interest, that have actually put some money on the table. So I'm wondering, does it mean that we're asking these investors to, because obviously our economic challenges are quite glaring, power is most obvious of the lot. Are we asking the investors to come and invest in our economic challenges? Because obviously, if we're asking them to come and invest in a country, tell them, okay, we have an industrial sector that hasn't expanded yet, but there's huge potential, but there's no power to drive these industries. So are we asking them to come into the country? Well, there's no light, but help us fix the light, and then you can have a share or something. Is that what we're asking investors to do?
Sincerely, I'm tempted to think that's how we are driving this process. Because, we want investors to come, probably open up the power generation, distribution as, business. And I think investors are coming in that regard, because there are opportunities in that sector, right? But, that is an investment enclave, you understand? But then the other manufacturers that they are existing and they depend on daily workability and daily production. They will have to wait for those guys who are investing in the power sector to get their investment right before they start production. Is that what we are asking? Because by implication, that's what we are saying. But I think government can find a situation where we just confront this power thing, and then investors can now come and join us, while we've taken some level of initiative. Because investment decisions are not taken by one person, right? So I think government should just take the bull by the horn. Let's go straight. Invest in electricity, make it, if possible, get money from the, from the market, get many people to be part of it. The control mechanism, let it be handed over to the private, partners, right? Not government, and do the same for refinery. We can do the same for refineries because, now we talked about subsidy the last time. We had issues with subsidy, and it paralyzed the economy for the first 1 month, even 2 months of this year. And those are avoidable, avoidable situations. Right? Because we are subsidizing consumption. We should subsidize production. Government can as well subsidize production of refined products. Government should shift from subsidizing consumption, subsidize refinery, because refinery is a big project. Not many investors who want to, plunge in.
Unless they see an incentive or a reason, or at least it's clear to them that they would get a return on investment at the end of the day.
Right. So government has to take the bull by the horn.
Okay, well, let's leave that there. Let's talk about the trade relations between Nigeria and Asia, but let's focus on Malaysia. Now, of course, you are the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council, and I was looking at our trade relations with Malaysia last year, looking at some numbers, and I did get one that said that trade relations between both countries hit about $450 million in 2001. That's an increase of 191%. 415 million of that amount was trade in oil produce exported from Malaysia to Nigeria, while Nigeria's imports to Malaysia was just about 35 million, and mostly in agricultural products, cocoa, rubber, and some others. Why this trade imbalance?
It's capacity driven. Trade imbalance is always capacity driven. It's what you have, you sell, right? What you don't have, you cannot sell. So it is not political. It is capacity. So, as we speak, Malaysia produce crude oil, right?
Actually, it's actually the third largest earner for Malaysia. They also produce.
Yeah, they produce crude oil, and they import crude oil too. They refine what they consume. Malaysia refine what they consume, and they sell what they are refined to some other countries that will need it. So they've been able to build capacity in the oil industry. Now we can say Malaysia has got an oil industry. Meanwhile, what they produce around something million. We produce 2.3 million, right?
Barrels per day.
But they produce about 500,000
barrels per
day, which is like a quarter of what we do. But they have refining capacity. We should have, at least for us to own this industry, we must have certain benchmarks that will qualify you to say, oh yes, I'm an oil country. But at the moment, we don't own anything in oil and gas.
So if we're talking about reviewing Nigeria's trade policy, it can't in any way be applied to this kind of situation where we should call for local. Well, then you said it's an issue of capacity, so it can't affect this particular scenario in any way.
Yeah, once we increase our capacity, right? Once Nigeria can increase our capacity in production, in manufacturing, right? Now, not in exporting crude oil. We should increase our capacity in production in service sector. Then we have much to export. So some trade imbalance will be automatically, right, naturally corrected.
Now, tell me about this preferential trade agreement that Nigeria is a part of. I think Malaysia is also, not a part of it. It's a combination of the D8 Commission, that's including Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, Bangladesh, Iran, and Indonesia. Shouldn't this policy in any way help to address these imbalances?
The D8 countries, they are actually, they are looking at areas to do business with one another. But it will still come back to capacity, because from those 8 countries, Nigeria, in terms of capacity, is at the bottom, right? Turkey is the 17th largest economy. Turkey, right? Even war-torn countries are doing far better because capacity is the key.
What do you think is fundamentally our challenge, as it were? Is it corruption? Is it a lack of political will? We come up with fantastic policies that perhaps if they actually do see the light of the day, we would all be better for it. These are issues we've been talking about, quarter in quarter, year in, year out, but it doesn't seem like I want to believe we are making some progress, but maybe not as fast as, it ought to be.
Yeah, it has to be. Now, our progress right, considering the global phenomena, must be, super jet, because there's no time, right? We are not making enough progress, and we make a little progress and we retrogress, in terms of continuity in policies. Like a new administration will come, a new minister will come, and will tell you, he will set aside what the former minister or his predecessor had put in place. Now it will reinvent the wheel. You understand? It will start from scratch. Government, or governance rather, is supposed to be continuum, But in our case, a policy is put in place, another personality will come into the picture, and will tell you what the predecessor did was not correct. And then contractual agreements with people, with organizations, with industry, with
investors,
with both local and international investors, we need to honor them. That's another point. We need to be able to honor them. Look, not when another person comes in and says, look, no, I disagree. If you have issues, you look at it, you renegotiate. Now another point is corruption. Corruption it kills more than malaria.
It's funny.
Corruption is terrible, right? And it brands you, it profiles you.
Do you think our policymakers, because there's so much focus on Nigeria, we had at the Lagos summit last week with the theme from bricks to brinks, with the end representing Nigeria. Lagos State wants to position Nigeria to be part of the 5 top emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, do you think perhaps policymakers have come to a point where they realize that, look, it's either now or never, we have to get things right this time? If they come up with policies, they have to follow them through. Like you said, the reversal of policy somersaults, where one administration or minister or government comes in and then throws out the old policies and brings in new ones. Do you think is there a paradigm shift? Is there a mindset shift, as it were? Do you think policymakers this time are aware that this time our developmental needs have to be adequately addressed? Now,
I think that is the thinking. Like the South, the Betty. Do you understand? These are very good initiatives. And then you see the actors in those in those places, like in Lagos, you can see what Lagos is doing. Lagos is, it's a model to the states in Nigeria. Lagos has become a model even to some countries in Africa, right? So we need such personality in government. We need people who are committed to proper governance. So
you're saying it boils down at the end of the day perhaps to leadership, having good leadership.
Oh, sure. Leadership with understanding. Leadership that has a vision, Leadership that is, the first quality of a leader is selflessness. You can't be a selfish person and be a leader, right? Rather, you become an imposter or you become a ruler. Right. So a leader must be selfless, must not be asking for what is in it for me. Right? Let us all do it for the general good of the people. So leadership issues are issues that needs to be properly looked into.
Okay, well, now with this summit that we're having, and all the attention being drawn to Nigeria, some parts of Nigeria, because that's in a way, like some analysts have said, puts the governors or the conveners of this summits on spots, the spotlight on them to deliver, as it were, down the line. So do you think that perhaps we'll see a significant change that will translate down into actual growth, perhaps in the coming months or coming, because like I mentioned, like I always say, our developmental needs will take years to solve. But in the coming months, should we be expecting some kind of change?
Yeah.
Are you optimistic that we will see that?
Oh, sure. I am very optimistic because I know that like Lagos government, they are doing very well. Now, we need to create monitoring, agencies rather. When issues are discussed or when agreements are made, when policies are drawn, let there be monitoring agencies for implementation. And let us create, basic, yardstick for implementation. What are those things we want to achieve in 3 months, in 6 months, in 1 year? If we can do that and we apply some level of selflessness into governance, because how much money does a man need? You apply such to governance that, look, it is all for everybody. Look, we'll have better results.
But while these things are being measured, being monitored, do you think perhaps it should also be made public in a way by the state governors themselves, those who have called this economic summits, drawing attention to themselves? Do you think it should be made public? Let's see, okay, while it's being monitored or measured, as it were, in terms of progress, should it be all out there so that we know that, okay, this is where we're coming from, this is where we're heading, this is how much progress that we've made?
It would be excellent if it can be put in the public glare. People will know what you are doing. Actually, people will know exactly what you are doing, because governance is, the people and those that are governing. You understand? It should be all inclusive. So government and those guys who have initiated such lofty ideas, they should take it back to the public, so public can appreciate the efforts.
Okay, now finally, before I let you go, now you are president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. There's still this trade imbalance between Nigeria and Malaysia, which you said, no, there's perhaps it's not Malaysia's fault if they're making more money from us than we are from them. You've talked about the issue of capacity building, which they have gotten right. In your capacity as president, what are the things that you have done or that you feel that you could be doing better in terms of putting Nigeria in a better position or better advantage in terms of, returns from this relationship with Malaysia?
We counsel members of our organization, to be ambassadors of the country, both ways. When Malaysians are coming here, they're going to be ambassadors of their country. When Nigerians are going to Malaysia, or when they're doing business with their counterparts in Malaysia, they must be ambassadors of the country. There are ethics codes, codes of ethics that you must ensure that that you don't deceive one another, that you are out in the open. We must do business with level of integrity. So that is one area we've been able to achieve some progress. And then once those areas are taken care of, then when it comes to the other issues of electricity and all that, the investment opportunities in Nigeria are enormous, I must say, and the world has recognized that, right? But then we have to get our house in order. I believe with the transformation agenda of Jonathan administration, if it's well pursued and implemented and is taken to the public glare, right? The transformation agenda and the objectives that are set out can deliver this country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your contribution. I'm afraid we have to leave it there at this time, but we do appreciate your coming to the studios. I have been talking to Larry Shegun-Lin. He's a chairman, industrial group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also the president of the Nigeria-Malaysia Business Council. We have been looking at Nigeria's trade policy. We've also been looking at attracting foreign direct investment into the country with a focus on the recent economic summits that we have had here in the country. That's talking about the Lagos Economic Summit held last week and the just concluded South-South Summit, which took place also last week at Sabah, the Delta State capital. Well, just a few minutes to the hour of 11 now. Before we go, let's just quickly check with our earnings board. We still have some more earnings trickling in on Customs Street. Well, this one here is from Sovereign Trust. That's its full year 2011 financials. Now, according to the company, gross premium came in significant, up 34.6% at 6.4 billion naira. Profit before tax came in higher, also up 91.9% at 798.1 million naira, while its profit after tax actually surged 128% to 704.1 million naira. The company is proposing a cash dividend of 4 kobo to investors. Alte Briscoe also put out its earnings. Turnover came in up at 29.6% at 19.6 billion naira. Profit before tax came up 52.3% at 292.8 million naira, while its profit after tax also came up positive, up 42.1% at 215.8 million naira. The company is proposing a cash dividend of 10 kobo and also a bonus share of 1 for every 5 shares held by investors. Well, that's it from our earnings board. Thank you so much for being a part of today's edition of Business Morning. Channel's news track is at 11. I'm Esther Ubodaga.